I guess I never really thought about the reality of the stakes.
That's why all of the experience in the world coming into a founder, like it's helpful to a certain extent, but it's not.
Welcome to the podcast, James. I'm really excited you're here. Thank you for hanging out for the next hour or so.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I would love for you to tell me a little bit about your previous experience before starting Venn.
Yeah, for sure. So my career, I guess, is the sort of tale of two halves, basically. So I would say I have I think it's 15 years now running up on in tech experience. And the first half of that was in sales. So I didn't intend to get into sales. I had moved to Toronto, where I am in Canada, to come to grad school, and I was kind of interested in film. And the first role I got
Really?
was working for a media company. Like I was selling stock footage of all things, but it was a sales role. And I think
Okay.
from there, that kind of just like media was hard to get into at the time. I'm
Yeah.
in Canada; it's not nearly as big as it is in the US, and so I
Yeah.
just
I
kind
was
of
going to
followed
ask,
my
like,
nose. Yeah.
what did you mean by when you wanted to be in film? Like, did you want to produce or?
It's actually it's funny. I wanted to be a professor. Is what I wanted to do.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. That's so cool.
yeah. So I had done an undergraduate in English, and I'd really enjoyed some film classes I'd taken. And so I came here. I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to do like a master's of literature.
Yeah.
So I came here. I was like, I'll just come to this film program. And so I wasn't even sure coming out of that if I wanted to actually work in the film industry. But I
Yeah.
thought I just finished grad school. I have some semblance of media something here. So I guess those will be the jobs I apply to while I figure
Yeah.
out what the next step is.
I think that's
And
always so
that's how it started.
interesting. School, like, I think that I don't know why, maybe it's just how our brains work, but I find it so interesting. And I've heard this echoed through similar interviews where what we go to school for, we then think that we need to like put that experience into the confines of the box of whatever we studied, right? So like, for example, for me, I studied art history. So I was like, oh, I should go and be like a museum curator. Like that makes sense. Or like I should work for art consulting or like something like that, as opposed to thinking, I mean, frankly, I don't think that it really helps me a lot like today, but I just think that it's so interesting that we are all thinking about what we do after graduation and putting it in terms of like the confines of a box of what we think makes sense about how we can apply that experience. But it sounds like you were able to find a sales role in film, and then that's sort of how like things got kicked off.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had no interest in tech, which is where I've made my life. And first it was like media and tech.
Yeah.
And then and sales was kind of just there. But now I build spreadsheets for billion-dollar financial tech companies. Like this is a departure. But I don't even know what you would do now to get started, because I think about just the makeup of tech organizations. And if you're a technical person, there's a way in, right?
Yeah.
Like you can go to school and you can take engineering and you'll be a highly technical person with a very specific role. Or you can go into computer science, which is a little bit more general, but still very pertinent. And there's lots of things you can do with that. But if you're a non-technical early career person, like there's two ways in. It's sales or it's customer success.
Yeah, or for me, it was office manager. Like that was the
Right.
only other way that I could get in on the ground floor of any tech company.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I have someone very specific in mind who I know started as an office manager and now is an executive.
Yeah.
It's just what you do. You kind of, for me, it wasn't even that I was taking what I could get in tech. It was just I was taking what I could get, and it
Period.
happened to be tech. Yeah,
That's how it goes. I think kids these days really don't understand that that's how it was for us. Like I talked to some of the kids who are at the tech startup I work for, my 9 to 5, they just graduated college a couple years ago. And for them, they're already like have a sick tech job that pays really
yeah,
well, has great benefits. Like I remember when I came out of college, I was like, holy shit, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have nothing lined up. And for somebody like us, like getting into tech seemed so challenging because like I technically wasn't qualified.
Yeah, you think.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the funny thing is that I think it's an industry and it's a type of people and
Mm,
culture that really seems to appreciate just figuring out a way, which
yes.
is the opposite of a technical skill, right?
Yeah.
It's just applying critical thinking, which is essentially what I was taught from day one when I go all the way back to school, right?
That's
It's just like
fascinating.
critical thinking.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. It's so true. Because I remember during my hiring process, I was up against a bunch of other office managers who had had a ton of previous experience before. I was coming from a project manager background, so I was working, building like large scale attractions for this really rich casino in China. And when I was talking to them, I was like,
Wow.
no, I've never done office manager work before, but I was like, I'm extremely comfortable working on my own. Like, I was literally an island, a one man ship building a $23 million project. I have no problem taking initiative, like, and being proactive because like it was literally just me. And I like had to figure everything out. And I had to work in a foreign country, work with consultants who were in California when I was in China. And I was like, frankly, I'm like low key overqualified for this position. Like, I could do this in my sleep, no problem. And they were telling me, like, during the hiring process, I was like, what's the T? Like, am I going to get hired or what? And my now boss was telling me, she's like, well, you're up against people who've done this before. But in the end, they hired me, I think, half because of my personality and the culture fit. And then the other half, I think, was simply because I have the ability to work on my own. I can be proactive and I can, like you said, there's a lot of critical thinking. Like, I can just get shit done and like nobody has to worry about it. And there is such a level of autonomy in tech that I have never experienced before. Like, I remember I started working, I was like, should I be telling somebody about like what I'm doing on a regular basis? Is there somebody that I should be informing of like the leaps and decisions that I'm making? And they're like, no, you got this. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
that's
crazy.
that's it. It's amazing, and it's actually something that's really foreign to people in completely different lines of work. I mean, I know people in the public sector, and it's
Yeah.
way different than that. And then big companies too. It's a lot more streamlined. There are a lot more layers of approvals, and there's a lot of values built in around like making the right people look good at the right times and kind of not being visible beyond that. Now, it's not necessarily fair for me to say all of these things. These are observations from a distance because I haven't really worked at one of these places, but
Yeah.
I've heard enough.
But you have a wealth of tech experience, so I'm sure you've come across similarities in terms of personalities, especially with founders. Like the more I interview, the more I find so many common denominators between founders. And I would love to get your experience next. I know you've worked with like a wide range of founders.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think, if I look at the traits that I think make a founder, some of them are not necessarily the most
Flattering.
positive or they're not like the easiest thing to sell. But
Yeah.
the, I was actually talking to somebody recently, very successful founder in the kind of media tech space. And I was explaining to him that over and above anything else, like I could not be told what to do anymore. Like
Yeah.
I almost had a childish, averse reaction to it.
Yeah.
And so I almost didn't feel like I could fit in an organization anymore because I just developed this allergy for a variety of reasons. Some I can put my finger on, some I can't. And she just immediately recognized this. Like, oh yeah, that's the founder's mentality.
100%.
And I think, okay, I don't know if I ever really realized that before, but if I think about it, like there's a lot of that sort of kind of cowboy-esque attitude toward
Oh,
them who it's just like, I'm going to go kind of make it happen on my own. And I think to a lot of their detriment, like sometimes it doesn't work out to just kind of go at it, go against the grain. But we hear a lot of the success stories. I think maybe those success stories are even overrepresented to us because those are the ones you hear.
yeah.
But that is the thing that sticks out the most is just this attitude.
Yeah, I honestly relate to that. I think like my aversion, I think I've definitely been averse to being told what to do ever since I was little. Like you can ask my mom, that has always been the case.
Yeah.
But the more that I think about my career and the more that I'm at home and my parents are like, what are you doing with your life? Like, what's the plan? I think on how there's no way that I could spend the rest of my life working and fulfilling somebody else's dreams. Like,
Hmm.
that I think is the hardest part for me to stomach is like I'm not doing that for myself and I'm just dedicating all of my time and energy to somebody else. And while that's like not a bad choice, like when I think about if I ever want, when I start my own company, I need to have people behind me who are super dedicated and super like also in touch with the vision that I want to create. Like they are also super
Yeah.
dedicated to that cause. So I need them. But it's my cause at the end of the day. And I think that's where like the differentiation comes from as opposed to just giving all my time and energy to someone else. And I feel like you probably had a similar moment to this where you were like, I have got to make a change. Like it's time. I have to go on my own.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, to frame up what you're saying, I think it's a critical mistake as a people leader to assume that somebody that you're in charge of has the same values or
Mhm.
objectives that you do. And as founders, you have a lot of equity, or in my case, I'm fully bootstrapped. I have all of it. And so when I'm talking to people on my team, I want people who are excited about work. I want them to be passionate about it. I want them to come in and do a good job and go over and above. But I have
Yeah.
to recognize that there are different incentives here. They do not have nearly as much wrapped up in my company as I do. So I have to treat them differently.
Mm.
And I think when I look back to the roles that I had, there were times when I was happy working for others, and then there were times that I wasn't. And
Interesting.
the times when I was is when I found those experiences really enriching.
Yeah.
Um, so I can think back to my time at Clearco. At Clearco, I came in a little bit like past the early equity days where everybody got wealthy off of. So I wasn't nearly as invested in that way, but I worked for people who were making me so much better.
Mm.
And that was something that while I wasn't going to benefit anywhere near the amount that the founders of that company were, um, based on how successful it was going to become, I had a lot to gain.
Yeah.
And so that was very motivating for me. Um, and then I think of basically my last full time role. I was working directly for a couple of young founders, and they were, I mean, those guys, they would grind. The amount of work and sweat equity and effort that they would put in was off the charts. And I think that they're seeing that in terms of their success. But they didn't have, well, I mean, they didn't even have any work experience. So they certainly didn't have any people management experience before that. They were like the real kind of
What?
drop out of school geniuses, like the people with the money are like, we're investing in those guys.
Oh my
But
God.
they had a really hard time in some cases
Yeah.
connecting with me, at least, on kind of what is it that's going to um, like make me want to give as much of a shit as they give.
Yeah.
And the answer was nothing. Like eventually it was nothing, right?
Oh,
I think that they and I could have like sat in a room with markers for a week and got on the whiteboard and tried to align incentives. But there was a point where I'm like, no, I have to be doing this, right? This
yeah.
has to be me in that position. I've got to go out and I've got to build something and look after myself. And there was a moment in there where I realized, hell or high water, like that's the next step for me. I have to go
Yeah.
do something for me.
When you started, I also imagine that that like played into how you set up the foundation of your company, thinking like, was that something you thought about early on? You're having this great idea for the company, and then you're like, okay, but simultaneously, I want to make this an amazing place to work and give as much as I'm getting back in terms of my employees' time and effort. Like, how do I do that? I don't know. Is that something I don't know. I assume you would consider that.
For sure. Well, first of all, I didn't have a great idea, so let's get that out of the way. Um, it's. I mean, I'm running a boutique RevOps agency. It's there's tons of competition out there, and we're still trying to find our legs and figure out what differentiates us. The business is going extremely well, but
Good
the
sign.
idea of it is still not like super differentiated. So
Mm.
I'm still working on that. But I think a lot about the environment I create, and hoping that it's a place that people feel kind of empowered and inspired by. Do I always succeed at that? Probably not, but it's really really important to me.
What are some of the questions that you took yourself through, or like the exercises where you're like, how do I create a fostering, nurturing, fulfilling environment?
Well, here I'll come at this a little bit differently. So my last full time role, I'm on the East Coast and I'm working for people on the West Coast, and um, we find out that my wife is pregnant with our second child. So I've just gone through this. I know what it's like to become a parent,
Yeah.
and all of the effort and the constraints on your time, and it's just the whole world changing. So I was knowing what I was getting into again, while still having another young daughter at home, and it was like it was so. I don't know how I would have done this any other way, to be honest. So I mean, you think, oh, you're going to go start a company right as you're about to have a child. You'll start it when your wife is extremely pregnant, and your first few months are going to be, well, you have a 3-year-old and a newborn at
Yeah.
home. And I think back to the roles that I had, and I don't think any other I don't think I would have survived any other role that I had. Like I remember back to my, you know, VP days where I was in the office for 14 hours a day. Now, I wasn't like eyes on the spreadsheet for 14 hours, but it became my second home. It became like I ate there all my meals, right? I socialized there. We hung out there, we had fun there, and we worked all the time. But when when my family arrives, I realize I have all of these pulls and these constraints on my time, right?
Yeah.
And they are completely unstructured. They could come at any time. Your kid could get sick out of nowhere,
Yeah.
right? Or your childcare falls through, as it did this morning. Like this morning, I didn't come to work until noon. Like I was on my phone doing childcare because of a whole variety of external factors I couldn't
Yeah.
control. And it was critical to me that I had the flexibility to just take care of my family.
Yeah.
And I think that despite how much work it is and how hard it is and how stressful it is to bootstrap your own company at the same time, I honestly think it was the most de-risked decision I could have made,
Hmm.
because I couldn't have had like the barrage of Slack messages hitting
Yeah.
me at 5:30 that I really felt like I had to answer and look after my family at the same time. It just would have been impossible. So now I'm just wake up and it's breakneck speed until I run out of energy in the day and I go to bed. But the way that I can configure those blocks is really important to me.
Yeah.
And now I recognize, like, these are all things that I never would have recognized in others, the needs that they have and the way that they work and the lives that they have and the constraints that they have and how stressful that can be. So that's something I try and bring to others now, is at the very least that understanding. It becomes very difficult when there's a real professional constraint that's showing up. You have
Yeah.
an upset client, or all of the projects you're delivering are culminating at the same time, and whatever. But that's just work. It's going to be like that sometimes, no matter where you are.
Yeah.
But that's the value or like those are the values I try and work around with people.
I love being in tech and like entrepreneurialism for those reasons. I think the freedom and the flexibility that presents is unparalleled. And I think when COVID hit, it really was like somebody just flipped a switch, and all of a sudden everyone was so wide aware that the way that we had been conducting work before is immediately like a thing of the past, and that there's so many other ways that we can collaborate and work together and continue to make these businesses run and succeed, but we don't have to do them in the traditional ways. And it's so funny because I feel like I like quote unquote like grew up in corporate. Like before, in college I worked retail jobs where you were on shift, and then after
Mhm.
college I worked another job where I was like shift, and then I worked in the back office, and like that was a super hyper professional environment, ultra corporate. Like you had to show up on time and you weren't allowed to leave early. Like you had to be there for face. And then working in China was similar but worse because like they're all about face and you had to be there all the time. And then like I was living in China, and during the pandemic when my project ended and all my other projects were technically on hold and I literally had nothing to do, but they were just paying me anyway, it became so frustrating because I was like, I could literally bust out everything that I needed to do, before 3 p.m. and then I could go home and like start my evening. But I could not leave. And there was no flexibility. I was like, and I was dying, right? I felt like I was chained to
Yeah.
my desk and I felt like I was dying. And I was like, I can't do this ever again because it just honestly doesn't make sense. It makes like no logical sense to anybody. It doesn't feel right. And I think having the flexibility is interesting, but I still find myself getting anxious. Like I'm currently in
Mhm.
Utah visiting my mom, and I had to, take her to a procedure this morning. And so I was like, technically didn't start work until like 10:30, and I was like at the hospital working. And I was nervous. I was like, and it's not like I have a problem with getting my work done. That's never been an issue. And I think that's the beauty of tech, right? Is like I have to constantly remind myself to be like, I'm a great employee. Like I do everything that I need to get done early typically. And like I'm always nervous. And I think that's partially because like I'm an overachiever and I can't help it. But working in tech has been such a blessing because of the freedom that it provides. And I look forward to entrepreneurialism where that's even at like the next level. But I mean, like you said, owning your own business is so hard and it's nonstop and it's all day, every day. But at least you have the ability to block out time to be like, I'm with my kids at this time, I'm off my phone. And you're not worrying about having to answer those messages between the 9 to 5. If you're getting messages like from your employees or something like that, you can message them at 8 p.m. after your kids go down or something like that.
Totally. And let me assure you, um, there is nothing that compares as I run my own business to the catastrophic dread of what you've just described when you're working for somebody else. And I don't think it's everybody that
Yeah.
experiences it, but it's certainly enough. And what you've described is exactly how I felt. And like just about messages or thoughts or whatever from other people who
Yeah.
it's not a threat. Like my work stood for itself
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, and it just for some reason my mind wants to assume that something really negative is brewing if I'm not just looking at my stuff all of the
Yeah.
time. And it became something that I just put my finger on as that's me. Like that's my personality, and that's something that I've got to fix. And nobody else is actually doing anything wrong
Yeah.
within reason. There are people that are kind of just unnecessarily applying pressure all the time, but by and large, that wasn't the case. It was actually just sort of anxiety. But
Yeah.
now, like, there's a lot of anxiety tied up in my own business, sure, but nothing quite like that, to be
Yeah.
honest.
I think like something that you and I talked about off air a little bit that I found really interesting that I really wanted you to get into was that you talked about how when you started this business, like you were semi aware of all the things that needed to get done in order to take it off the ground because you'd experienced it to some level of capacity in your previous experience. But when you really got into it, it was like, oh shit, there's way more than I realized. And I would love for you to like, if you have any specific examples of like when that occurred or maybe something that people should be looking out for in terms of like, oh, you would never think about that, but it is super necessary.
Yeah, there's no safety net under you, and I think
Mm.
that as you like when you work in other organizations, there's sort of this imperceptible structure around you that
Yeah.
will protect you in a way. Like if you miss an email, some way somehow somebody's got it. or you're always working as, or often working as part of a group of people who are all responsible for something. And so I had, I don't know, I could arguably say been in almost every non-technical function that you would have in a startup in my career. Um, and in leadership roles in sales, rev ops, biz ops, finance, and kind of generalist ops. And even at Slash, I owned HR, which was, I brought in somebody good and she did an excellent job. So I was hands off, but it was there.
Yeah.
Um, but all of a sudden, when you're doing yourself, like setting up your bank accounts, like I understand banks and funds and flows of funds and banking structure, but all of a sudden it just felt like completely different. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I was given a series of problems that I could solve for a company so easily, but when I'm doing it for myself, I'm like, I have to do elements of this that I didn't even know existed, like picking a bank, for
Yeah.
example. Like, and that's a lot of work if you want it to be, and or setting up my corporation. And the day when you and I spoke, I'm doing some branding work and I was looking at color palettes all day. And I can like, my eyes have trouble distinguishing between brown and green. I'm not technically colorblind, but like there's some weakness there.
Oh no.
If I was failing anything in middle school, it was art class. Like I could not draw, I could not color inside the lines, yet somehow here I am looking at color palettes and making decisions on branding and how it's going to hit the eye and how the viewer or the consumer of that is going to feel. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, this is not
You're like, it's
anywhere near
green. I
my
don't
area of
know.
expertise. Yeah, and it's like I go from looking at color palettes into like spreadsheets and then talking to people. Like, it's just this crazy variety of things that you have to deal with, and it can be all within the course of minutes or hours.
Yeah.
So you have to be kind of ready for that breadth. But at the same time, I never walk out of here thinking, wow, that was monotonous. And sometimes, like, depends on who you are. Some people like monotony or
Mm-hmm.
kind of repeated tasks or like doing the same thing and that kind of mastery. But I kind of love the
Yeah.
roller coaster of just having to do everything.
Well, I think it honestly also goes back to like the personality of founders. I really believe that they are like unique individuals that are designed for these types of roles because it's like you said, you're wearing 700 hats, especially at the beginning. Like for me, I think my weakness would be anything surrounding like, you know, compliance, you know, or like HR or all the weird password stuff that you have to do for your computer and like
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that. I use the keychain. I to apply that on a larger scale to the business, like you're right, it requires research and it's as hard or takes as long as you want it to. Like if you want to be really thorough and thoughtful about it, like there goes your week. But at the same time, your feet have to be grounded in the mission and the purpose about like why you're doing these things. And like I think sometimes or somehow maybe it's just like in our design where we're high level thinkers, so like we can see the big picture and to some level detail oriented. Like I would consider myself hyper organized, like pretty detail oriented, but at the same time there's only so far you can go because then a lot of your expertise and time gets spent on stuff that isn't necessarily, I think, where we shine the most. And it's so challenging at the beginning because it's like just us
Mm.
until you're able to hire people. But you can't get to that point unless you have established the foundation as like a successful company, or like maybe you got funding, or maybe you're, you know, at a growth cycle and you're scaling. But like those things don't happen unless you as the founder have done and taken the time to work through all the beginning stages. And I think that's why like I love to focus so much on the beginning part, because it is so hard to do like all of these things by yourself. How do you know what questions to be asking? How do you answer those questions? It's a whole like, how do I know what to ask if I don't know what to ask?
Right. You figure it out. But I actually think that there's something in this that becomes where a lot of organizations fall apart. And
Mm.
that is that how, when you have created all of this knowledge, do you effectively transfer it to people as you scale? And
Yeah.
that's really hard. And to be quite honest, I'm not at the stage where I've had to do that en masse yet. But it's something I've seen go really wrong in organizations where we move so fast and the priorities are so urgent. I mean, around building and shipping and revenue and growth and all of those things, that it's really hard to find time for 4 hours to write down what to do with the bank accounts, because the person you've hired to come in and do finance needs that context,
Yeah.
right? And you can do it for 20 minutes a day instead. And it's the temptation to just handle the task for 20 minutes a day instead of taking 4 hours to transfer it over. It's just a bad investment. It's a bad
Mm.
time investment.
Mm.
But it's one that gets made so often. And so I just hope that I have the strength and the discipline when the time comes to realize that I'm doing this and that I'm holding on to work and that I'm holding on to context, because I'm being undisciplined,
Mm.
and that the right decision is to find time to actually transfer those things and give people full ownership over them.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of organizations fall apart under that sort of pressure, like trying to transition from like 1 to 2, not from
Yeah.
0 to 1.
Yeah, like how do you know, as you scale, you become like the tribal knowledge holder. And I love that you said that it was a discipline thing. Like it's really about understanding that that 4 hours is better in just like the quick succession as opposed to prolonging the pain for 20 minutes every day. But I also wonder if this is another thing about like documentation. Maybe would it make sense during those, the 20 minutes before you pass it down, like instead of doing, maybe take an extra 10 to write all of it out on a piece of paper. So that when that person shows up, you can just be like, boop, forward, and then they can have this. And if they have questions, you can maybe go over it in like a quick one-on-one. But I don't know, maybe that would be helpful.
Well, I mean, so I'm talking about a person who's disciplined enough to take 4 hours to offload 20 minutes a day. You are talking about a person who is another level of discipline, who, when they're a company of one, has the foresight to document how to do these things, for the future, like for scale. And there's got to be a balance in there, right? Because
Mm.
if I sat down every day and documented everything that I did for a future state, it would be a waste of time. But
Yeah.
there's definitely things I do each day where one day I will wish I had documentation. And I quite honestly rarely make that decision. I'll document how I service clients and stuff like that. But internal operations and stuff, no, not a chance. But
Yeah.
I'm lucky because um, one of the things that I think people that I've done well, that like people do, or people who are really successful do effectively, is I've started to kind of build a group of people around me that like I try and have around me at all times, that have been with me at multiple companies. And my chief of staff, Scarlett's amazing, and she's all of these things. And so as early as I could, I brought her in with me. And
Mm.
so she'll handle a lot of these internal operation stuff. And if it's not documented somewhere on paper, it's documented well enough in her mind that she can transfer this knowledge. So
Yeah.
hopefully, I notice these things sometime in the future and actually develop an appreciation for them when it's not me doing this 20-minute, 4-hour problem I'm describing.
Yeah. I mean, I had sat down the other day for 2 hours with our head of demand generation because it's my first step, sort of like outside of my office managerial duties into marketing, which is super fun because I find it to be fascinating. But it was literally like 2 hours of her just explaining to me how marketing worked. And I was so appreciative of her time because she's hella busy. There's two people technically in marketing for our entire company, and they're drowning and so busy. And like the fact that she took those 2 hours to sit down and talk to me was something that I could never really fully express my gratitude for, because that's going to give me a huge jumping platform to go off of. And it comes back later because of the work effort that I'll put in, etc. But it's still like that that trade-off, which I think is consistently something that you are confronted with as a founder. It's like there's trade-offs at every second of every single day for everything.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And there's the right and wrong personality types for different phases and different types of jobs. And you sound like you have somebody who's really great in helping you there. And that's something I just wouldn't be as good at. I get too focused on the task, and I want to do the task, and I want the task to be done.
Yeah.
But these people that can immediately understand the value of transferring knowledge and of lifting people up and building them up and building up their skill set and their knowledge. Like I hope to be that person. I think there are times when I am, but it's not as natural to me as it is to some other people. And I'm thankful to have people around me that are really strong with that. And I hope to be better one day, but it's great to hear that you've got that sort of person in your organization, because it really pays dividends.
I think if I could probably boil it down, I think self-awareness is probably the most important trait that a founder could have, because it, I think, is the most important thing as you scale. Like when you start at the beginning, you're not going to be the same person that you are when the company is going public, for example. And I've heard stories time and time again of when either investors will be like, well, we want to invest in the company, but we don't want to invest in you, or vice versa. We want to invest in you, but we don't want to invest in this company. And I think that there's also been moments when you've scaled, you've hit IPO, it's this huge thing. And then all of a sudden the board is like, we don't really love you as the founder anymore. And I think that's like the scariest thing to think about. But I think if you have a level of self-awareness to where you can be like, how can I improve myself as a leader, as a business person, as a human being? I think it opens you to be able to accept feedback more. I think it allows you to see things on a higher level without the emotional attachment. So then you can make improvements.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a letting go that is really hard, because if I picture, if Ben's 100 people and I'm lucky enough to have my own executive team, I really probably should be doing one thing really, really well, like one subject matter type of thing. And in my case, it would probably be business development.
Mm.
And I need to have the ability to attract, hire, and keep happy people to do those other things. And I think some founders never graduate out of this idea where they are running everything. Like, you can still be in charge of everything, but not running it. You should, at a certain point, bring in people to run that. And you should be very clear about what it is that that person needs to do. And it should be something that's very easy to check up on. There's always going to be problems that, as an executive team, you need to get together and solve, or there's like directional things you need to set. But I've seen too many founders like get stuck at that point where they're not really sure how they go about managing all of the different functions. And the answer is, you're not supposed to be managing those functions.
Yeah.
Stop managing them. Let someone else do it.
Yeah.
But these
It's
are the
funny.
things that,
I feel like
these are the pains
I'm
that
the
come with growing.
opposite.
So good
I feel
problems to
like
have.
I don't have any of the technical skills that are necessary, especially for like the tech platform that I'm working on. I mean, maybe like I think I can lend my expertise when it comes to marketing and stuff like that in terms of like more detail oriented tasks. But I can't wait for the day that I can hire people to do all the things that I don't know how to do, nor would I consider myself to be intelligent enough to do by myself. Like, I think that's why I hesitated for so long with entrepreneurialism. Like, I didn't have an idea for a product. I didn't feel like I specialized in one area enough to start a business around it. And so I was always kind of just waiting for the right thing to come up, or like the right time, or for me to have this great epiphany where all of a sudden I realized like this is what I meant to start. And it wasn't until my best friend asked me to be his co-founder and we started talking about it and I started asking these questions, and I would have moments where I was like, who said that? like where are these words coming from? Where is this knowledge coming from? And it didn't hit me. And then I was having an interview once, and this guy was saying that like the job of the CEO is more or less to be the orchestrator. Like you do not have to be specialized in any one skill to get the job done. You're more or less the person that like drives the mission, the purpose, high level values that then like trickle down into the execution level tasks that your team around you is responsible for. And that's the moment I was like, oh, that sounds great. Like that makes a lot more sense to me. And I think maybe that's why I'm so obsessed with scale, is because I think I see the steps on a piece of paper and I'm like, okay, this is just step one. Like I know where we need to go next. And I'm always like thinking about what comes after that and how we can get past the rough stuff in the beginning, like iron it out and then make it smooth. So then that way, as we scale, which is inevitable in my mind, it's as easy as possible.
Right. Right. But it's not.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not. It's not. I swear. I see myself every day. Like there are decisions I know I need to make,
Yeah.
and I don't make them. And it's funny. It's the because when the consequences are really that real,
Yeah.
um, then it becomes hard. And so having that foresight, but then also having the confidence to do it are different. And I'll give you an example. Earlier, to echo back to where I said, well, I didn't have a great idea. So I am running this RevOps agency. And the way I've been able to get a lot of business is there isn't a lot of talent density at the executive level in RevOps. The job function hasn't really been around that long. In a way, it's been around forever, but in another more direct way, it's been around 6 or 7 years, really, and it got really popular in the last 3 or 4. So the amount of people who have been doing it for 7+ years are few and far between. Now, I happen to be one of those people, and so I can go into a conversation and I can have a lot of credibility with a potential client, right?
Yeah.
And explain that I've done this, I've been there, I've sat at the table, I've done it from execution as an individual contributor through like 2 layers of people and a high level as an executive. But to grow a services business, it's way easier to specialize. Like if you want to actually create velocity as a
Yeah.
business, if I were to go out and say, we are the fintech, B2B fintech RevOps agency. And we have all the certifications and all the know-how to do that. And quite frankly, that's true. Like the amount of fintech experience I have across my small team is outrageous. But making that decision then means if somebody who's just in a straight B2B SaaS, which we're also really good at, comes across and looks at my website, they'll go, that's not for me, right? And so that's a hard decision to make because right now I think about 60% of my clients are B2B fintech and 40% are B2B SaaS. So it's like step one is don't have the specialty, and that's where we are now. Step two is specialize and feel a little bit of that pain. Step three is hit another level of scale.
Yeah.
But what's like, how painful is step two, right? And that's why, like, when am I actually going to take that step that I know is good for the business, medium and long term, but may actually be a real pain in the short term?
Yeah, and it's like, how do you know which way to start? Do you start super specialized and super small and then sort of like expand out with more experience? Or do you start wider because, it's easier to cast a wider net, catch more clients, get more word of mouth, get more trust, get more clients, like get more experience, and then, maybe start to narrow down as you've had all these experiences, you can be like, oh, well, we worked really well with this, but not as great with that. So like, do we, hit that path? And I guess I never really thought about the reality of the stakes behind all of it.
Yeah. That's what it is. That's why that's why all of the experience in the world coming into a founder, like it's helpful to a certain extent, but it's not all the way helpful. And that's what the real difference is when I'm making a decision for my business that is a decision I've made for other businesses dozens of times, and I made it with ease, and I made it successfully, right?
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, the stakes are squarely kind of landing on you, and it takes courage to actually, like,
Yeah.
you know, put yourself in that position and see it through. And I do it every day. I make those decisions, but then there's some that I still need to make. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's like hard to muster up the courage to do it, especially when things are going fine, right?
Yeah. How do you overcome the fear? Is it just like to use data to back it up? Or you like, this I think makes sense based off of X, Y, or Z? Or is it just sometimes like a gut feeling and you're like, well, if this blows up in my face, it is what it is?
Uh, Quite frankly, like, there's two things that'll really prompt me to act. One is intuition,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something I've relied upon for a long time, and it seems to be getting better. And then the other thing is opinions from people I trust. And I don't listen to them, or sorry, I don't follow those opinions all the time,
Yeah.
but they're always filled with wisdom in some way, and I have a great appreciation for them. But people who are really smart, who I know, who I bring a problem to, have prompted me to act in a way that I probably wouldn't have before. And so
Yeah.
you've really got to trust that. But I think having a good network of mentors and people you trust and people who've been there is like pretty crucial. I don't know how people get by without it.
Yeah. I mean, being a solo founder is hard unless you truly have surrounded yourself with people that you can lean on and call and ask questions, because to do it, there's no way you could do it by yourself. And like, even if you have wicked good intuition, you still need guidance. I think like we all
Yeah,
need guidance.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And there's ways of doing it, and there's different types of wisdom people out there can bring to you. But by nature, it's a lonely thing,
Mm.
because you are effectively trying to do something either no one else has done or very few have. And companies that are the most successful are obviously the ones that have done or doing something that no one else has done.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to kind of walk into the vastness of the dark in a sense. But if you have people who've done their own version of that you trust, I think that's the most helpful, because there's nuggets of wisdom, even if it's not the exact same scenario you're in. Probably isn't.
Yeah.
There are enough similarities that good people can really help you with.
Yeah. Like they too have also gone against the grain, done something people told them that they were absolutely insane for, and it ended up working out because they trusted and believed in themselves and then their idea, and they were able to stand up and be like, it worked. Or maybe it didn't, but then the second one worked. But I think that's like all about the courage and sort of this like overwhelming self-belief that will push you through.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's funny because I didn't think of this when I started down this path, but um, I look a lot about at what the Silicon Valley sort of royalty folks are saying and thinking. And one of the threads, and I think it was Sam Altman that started talking about it recently, was what he looks for in a founder is
Hmm.
not brilliance or ability or pedigree or any of those things, but somebody who's like two standard deviations ahead in determination.
Hmm.
And it's not always the easiest thing to measure, but when you take somebody who's taken something to the edge and had a big failure, like, the tech world is really, really good at celebrating those people and really looking at the positive sides of those failures. Um, and I think it's a really welcoming community for risk, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that you tap into that and tap into that attitude, and I think it gives you like another layer of comfort that even if this thing blows up in my face, I will be better for it, and I will have a community of people around me who appreciate that I'm better for it, and it
Yeah.
won't be the kind of devastating thing that it might have been 20 years ago or in a different industry. It will be perceived completely differently.
Yeah. Like there's no shame around trying and failing. there's almost more shame around not trying instead. And I think
Yeah.
that's like the coolest thing ever, because without that, like, I don't think that we would have the level of innovation that we have now. It's so fast and there's so much because of that kind of an environment where we're like, you want to try something? Be our guest. Like, absolutely try it. If it doesn't work out, tell us why, and then we'll figure it out and how to make it better next time, or like how to move forward and try something else. And I think that's just so unique and it's so fun as a result. Like,
Yeah.
it feels really welcoming because you're like, oh, I don't have to be scared that somebody's going to make fun of me because it didn't work out. Instead, they're going to be like, why? What happened?
Right.
Do you want to
Right.
try again? you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And it's funny because as you described that, I do think it's fairly unique.
Yeah.
When I compare it to other types of industries and the attitudes in those industries, because when I'm talking to people in my life that are kind of in different sectors, and like the amount of discomfort they seem to
Yeah.
have around risk, and I think it's because if they took risks like that, then they would not fit with like the people that they're
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
So we're very lucky to have that.
Yeah. I find it's hard sometimes to talk to like specific people about these kinds of things because they just fundamentally live in a different world. Like,
Yeah.
I think that there are those who like the thrill and like want to push the boundary and see how far it can take them. And I think that there are others who are comfortable not taking risk, who much prefer to take the safe option. And like, there's nothing wrong with both sides. But I think that, like, to some level, it's a fundamental incompatibility that for early stage founders, I think it's so dangerous sometimes to like talk to your idea to those kinds of people because they're going to try to talk you out of it.
Hmm.
When, to have people like you that we can talk to and hear from, where it's like, no, 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 try it. And if it doesn't work out, then like figure what comes next, but try. I think it's so important because then it gives them the courage and the confidence to do the scary thing when they can look back and see an entire industry where the people who were in the exact same position, feeling the exact same thing, did it and succeeded.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are two really good data points about this recently, and I wish I could remember where I saw the study, but um, found ex founders who have failed
Yeah.
end up like their salary, like earning averages higher than people who didn't found a company.
Really?
So, and yeah, in that sense, it's de-risked in a way.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other thing to look at right now is that a lot of people assume that going and getting a job at a big company is de-risking your career to an extent.
Yeah.
They're safer, they have fewer layoffs, whatever. But then they don't, and that happened,
Yeah.
right? Like that. I mean, it happened in 2008.
Yeah.
I mean, I got my first job in 2010, so I didn't live through it, but I sure as hell saw it. And then it happened again when COVID hit, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden, these people who'd made the safe decision were getting laid off, and they
Mhm.
were having a really, really difficult time. Yet, I'm out here building an agency, and I've had no shortage of work at all. And even
Yeah.
I mean, tech was hit hard too. And it seems to be the people who are applying to jobs who are having the hardest time. But there's lots of people out there founding companies right now and trying to make their own path who are finding ways through fractional or finding ways through one-off consulting gigs and then turning these things into businesses. And it seems like even just a straight up less risky path sometimes, which
Yeah.
is wild.
I think work is going to be so different 5 years from now. Like, I feel
For
like I'm
sure.
going to call it that flexibility and taking ownership of your own skills and being able to apply them outside of a traditional corporate environment is going to become more and more prevalent for all of the reasons we just talked about. Like, 2020 really demonstrated how quickly and how like permanently things can shift,
Yeah.
and how you need to be adaptable. And people are starting to see the value of working for themselves, aside from just the financial freedom, but also just like the freedom period that comes with being your own boss. And I just feel like that's just going to increase and increase and increase. And maybe it won't be everyone starting their own companies. Like maybe, freelance will continue to explode. And I think just like being able to jump between companies and work for maybe like more like project style, I would be interested to see how that evolves over time.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard, I think it's somebody important who said it, but I don't remember who, but I've heard the phrase, the future of work is modular. And
Mm,
I think it is true. I think
yeah.
that companies get built in a way where a certain set of skills and probably people associated with those skills are useful for a while and then they're not. And I
Yeah.
think that now and backwards, that was a really unfortunate thing. And people, the way you handle that was by firing them and bringing in people who are better for the next stage. And that's so unfortunate. And it's been really, really damaging. And I think that now we're recognizing that different people in different environments with different like life requirements and work requirements and bandwidth requirements um, can come in, contribute, and they can actually build careers for themselves that are a lot more lucrative
Yeah.
than even a regular career before. And that's
Yeah.
something that's to all of our benefit.
Yeah. It's like the power is with the person
Yeah.
as opposed to the hiring manager being like, well, we only need you for X amount of time and then, letting you go. It's like, no, I now have the power to step in and then step out when I'm no longer needed. And then I can just move on to the next, step in, step out. And I feel like that's also better for fulfillment because you're working on things where your skill set is really valued, needed. You feel like you're doing the best job that you can, adding a lot of value. And then when you feel like you no longer are adding value or you're not connected anymore, you can step out and like find the next thing. And I'm like, that's better for literally everybody involved.
Yeah, 100%. And it's actually exactly how my business runs because I definitely noticed that over time that a lot of people, and I definitely felt like one of them, would come in and make a big impact on an organization really quickly, but then all of a sudden the impact would slow.
Yeah.
And I think it's just that certain people like get really excited or in the old way would get excited about a job because they were actually getting excited about a project or an initiative
Yes.
or something that they could bring. And they would come in and they would bring that into the organization and set it all up. Like I think of a marketer, coming in, figuring out how to get paid going, changing
Yeah.
it around so that it's working. And now it's working. Okay. But now you're just getting paid a lot and maintaining this thing? Like, is
Yeah.
that really what you want to do? You
Yeah.
get unhappy, you leave, or they get unhappy paying you for something that you delivered 6 months ago, and I'm just maintaining. But now we can just say, hey, pay me a quarter of my salary, which it's actually going to take me a tenth of my time, like a tenth of my bandwidth for the year to go deliver this project for you, and then I'll
Yeah.
be gone. And you know what? Call me back. Like if you want something else, call me back.
Yeah.
Um, and it's actually something I face a lot. So if I look at what my competitors are doing, um, there's a lot of these RevOps agencies out there that are trying to get people on monthly recurring models. And I know
Mm,
why, because monthly recurring models are amazing for your books, right?
interesting.
And I love when I have some that are recurring. I love when I get that money coming every month. It's amazing. But I try really hard actually not to do that. There are certain times when it makes sense, but typically I like to go in to find a really valuable thing that I can bring to an organization and deliver it
Yeah.
and have an end on that. And what I find is one of two things happens if it goes well, and it usually does. One, there's another thing we think of
Hmm.
because we've really liked working together. Or two, they're out there in the market saying amazing things about me.
Yeah.
And while I can't go say that customer I can attribute now to a monthly recurring revenue stream, I can actually attribute revenue over a long period of time to these people because they're bringing me leads. They're talking about me nicely in professional communities. I see it. I'm building my reputation. I'm getting great logos. I'm getting great case studies. and I can continue to build off of that. I think way better than having people get addicted to my services over a long period of time and pay too much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, you know, identifying where your value is at the peak and then like gracefully bowing out when it's not necessary anymore. And, you really want to like drive impact when it's the most needed. And then you can be like, okay, like, let me know if you need more, and then they'll probably call you back because you did such a great job.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's about 70% of my customers have had a second contract or more now, and still talk to the other ones. So
Yeah.
it's been a really good model in that way. But there's lots of different ways to run a business like this. So other folks are having success other ways too.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing and such a fun, fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it, Maddie. I really love what you're doing here. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you.